Welcome back to Under Two Capes. I'm Jared, and first off, today I'd like to welcome back Wes from Thinking Critical. Welcome back, buddy.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Love talking about comic books and all the fun stuff that goes along with it.
So today, what's the interesting topic I have today is one that I've honestly been wondering for a long time because we have like all these mega popular like MCU, moderately popular DCEU movies. So I figured, okay, if the movies are so popular, you would think that other parts attached to those characters would be popular, including the comics. So my question is, should really comics be a niche fandom? Because after all, the movies are mega popular. So I'm start by asking you, why do you think the comics are still struggling to escape from that niche like status?
Well, I think comic books will probably always be like a niche hobby just because it's so peculiar the way that people experience and read comic books. Most people aren't used to reading things one chapter at a time, essentially, a month at a time. So the reading experience itself is just a little bit different. They are expensive, especially today when you think about what it takes to get like one comic book story, which will probably take you a good 6 issues to get one story out there. That's at least $24. That's a really nice hard paper or hardback like book that you could read for a couple weeks. It's like 1,000 words or something. So it's just a different way of experiencing these stories. And one of the reasons I do think that comic books will always kind of be niche themselves, not the characters. Obviously, the characters are mainstream.
Oh, yeah.
Characters on the movies, or they're on streaming, television, everything. Video games, you can't escape the characters. They're on all the backpacks and stuff. But the comic books themselves, a lot of it has to do with I think there's a collector mentality a lot of times with comic book readers. And, obviously the big boom that happened in the 90s was all about value with the comic books. People are like, oh, my goodness, I could send my kids through college, with these older comic books if I get the right one. And I think people kind of found out that was fool's gold unless you had like, Superman #1, Action Comics, first appearance of Batman and Detective Comics, maybe Amazing Fantasy 15 or something like that. So you get the collector mentality, and it's just like it's so much space, isn't it? Like, oh my goodness. I have a smaller house and I've got 3 kids. I don't have enough space for my comic book collection, and it's small, especially compared to like I think Doc said he's got like 8,000 comic books.
Oh, jeez.
Breen said at one time he had 50,000 comic books. Can you imagine? That's
my
like 2 rooms in a house.
It's like every time I go to my LCS and I come home, I'm like, I can see the amount of free space I have get smaller and smaller and smaller. It's a terrifying thought.
Absolutely. And that's what I think I do. Like digital comics, I do think are the way of the future. I think, your tablet is the new spinner rack and stuff. And that's certainly going to make things easier where you can have your digital collection. You sign into your whichever app that you're using. Hopefully one day we'll get Marvel and DC and Image and some of these other publishers get together and make some type of competitor for Comixology. But that makes it certainly a lot easier as far as the storage space. But then you lose the value in the collection. Why would I want to spend the same amount of money for a digital comic as it would cost me a physical comic? And the physical comic could, theoretically end up being worth a lot of money. I've got comic books that really aren't all that old, like Batman Damned #1, the first appearance of the Batwing. Worth a little bit of money. You wouldn't get that with the digital stuff. So it's just a different mentality that kind of breaks apart even into more niche, like the comic book hobby itself. You know what I mean?
That's true. And actually Doc addressed this in one of your videos. When you buy something on digital, you don't really own the item. You essentially
you
own
access to it, and
exactly.
The storage space, I guess, on a server that says that you can read this particular pamphlet.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like if the app like shuts down, like let's say in a world in the multiverse, Comixology has to shut down. You lose all those books. Where, let's say, DC shut down. Let's just say I still have my trades and my single issues, so it's not like I lose all that part of my collection. In other words,
absolutely. There's definitely I think a lot of people are becoming more keen to the fact that you want to own things physically, even like movies. Yeah, because they can go back retroactively and start changing stuff. I know George Lucas, I'm a big Star Wars fan. Actually, that was probably my first love when it came to entertainment. I think he went into the revamped original trilogy with the best of intentions, but I'd rather see the originals with the warts and all, with the little Vaseline stuff underneath the speeder and all that. I think they look better, and some of the additions just didn't look right, and you can't get your hands on those. They say they're never going to sell them again.
It's like in episode 1 where they replace Yoda with a CGI character. I'm like, I see what they're going for here, but it's kind of hard to get used to it because my first 1,000 times watching episode 1 was with the puppet. So I'm like, oh, this is a lot to get used to.
Yeah, that puppet didn't look nearly as good, shockingly, as when Yoda was introduced in was it Empire Strikes Back?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
shockingly, the puppet from the 80s was more realistic than the one from the 2000s. Or was it 99?
I think it's 99. Yeah, for episode 1. But yeah, that's actually a good point. I love that. So now here's the thing, though. There are steps that the comic book industry could, or let me put it this way, that Marvel and DC could take to make their stuff escape from the level of obscurity they are now. Because I've always said what they should do at the end of every movie, let's say at the end of Man of Steel, they put a 1 second ad at the end, before the post-credit scene, because I know people are waiting for the post-credit scene that says, if you want to read more Superman, go to your LCS or pick up these comics. That's at least one step they could use, I think, at least.
Well, I think, tying the comic books themselves into the mainstream entertainment media that's out there is absolutely going to help the hobby and stuff like that. But I think what would be even easier, you've got Disney Plus out there. You've got all this Marvel content. You got all these Marvel stories. Just give people the Marvel Unlimited app for free with their Disney Plus. And once you go and you select, Infinity War, say, hey, there are stories that inspired this. You should go read Infinity Gauntlet. You actually have free access to it right now. Go check it out. And maybe there will. I don't think it would convert everybody. Not everyone would select it, and not everyone that went and read it would like it, because it is a lot different. And the comic book medium is obviously very different than movies and streaming and stuff. But it would certainly get more access to people, and they would certainly have more awareness of what the comic books are. That all these amazing stories that people like. There's a lot of times a better version of it out there. There aren't very many of these stories that were adapted to the movies that kind of just weren't done better in comic books. Even Marvel Civil War, which I thought was really good in that Captain America movie, the scope and scale.
Yeah, I was like, wait a second.
In the comic book just blows it away, just the amount of characters that are involved there.
And that's why I think that's one of the reasons why I think they had to change the plot of Civil War, because half the characters the majority of the characters that played a pivotal role in Civil War weren't in the movies yet. So so instead of having a movie where they introduced 50 characters, they were let's significantly scale this down.
Well, plus you got stars that are playing all those characters. If you try to put a real Civil War movie on the big screen, make it 2 parts so you could get the most of the story in there, is it going to be a $500-600 million movie just trying to do the entire story and then paying all the salaries? That would have been,
I heard
unwieldy.
I heard that what they should have done is actually save Civil War till after Endgame, because you have you have more characters to work with that would have had a very much more interesting dynamic, instead of just the classic Avengers lineup.
Well, they should have called it Avengers Civil War.
That's true too.
It basically is an Avengers movie, kind of Avengers light. It's a little bit smaller in scale and a little bit shorter than some of the Avengers movies, but really it wore the Avengers title. I thought it was really well done. It was way better than Ultron. Way better. So.
Oh yeah, Age of Ultron was the worst Avengers movie, I still say, by far.
Yeah, that one's not very close, but the other ones were so good. The first one is just classic. Infinity War, still really good.
Yes.
I think it's odd that Thanos is portrayed as the protagonist in the story, which I take a little exception with. But otherwise, that's a really good one. Then Endgame, just as a celebration of the MCU and all the characters and the history, and see Tony go back and finally see his father again. And, obviously Thor gets to talk to his mom, and you get all these cool things that happen in there. The plot itself isn't all that great, but just the celebration and the the grandeur around Endgame was just really good.
Captain America finally carrying the hammer and like destroying Thanos with the hammer. That was dope. As a Captain America fan, I was like, yes, finally.
Yeah, you get the first Avengers assemble.
The first and only for some reason, but I'm like, you waited this long to actually show it. But going back, yeah, there are plenty and what's interesting, there are also plenty of times where like the movies try to adapt something and it just blows up in their faces, like in Black Widow when they brought in Taskmaster. I was like, it was kind of funny when I was watching the movie. I had seen an internet article saying they ruined Taskmaster, so I'm like, okay, well, wait a second, how bad can this possibly be? And then it happens in the movie, and I'm like, oh, I see what they're talking about here.
I don't know what's wrong with why they don't get Taskmaster right. He's such a cool villain. He's got like really good motivations. You know, he's kind of an a-hole, but he's such a threat to anybody. If he gets to see how you move for like 2 seconds, you're done. Mm-hmm. Like you have no chance against the character, and they just kind of made him a walking, talking joke. I'll never understand the Taskmaster stuff, but for some reason, the MCU, they're really good at fleshing out their heroes and making them like really important. But the villains outside of, obviously Loki, who had a face turn in that one, Thanos, there hasn't been a whole lot of really great villains. I did like, was it Abomination? And that was cool. Hulk movie was pretty good, but we haven't seen him. Well, I think he actually showed up eventually, but
he's going to be in She-Hulk at least. Yeah. But what I did say, you'll love this. The excuse for why they portrayed Taskmaster that way is that they couldn't find a way for him to be tied to the Black Widow program. And I'm like, correct me if I'm wrong, but he trains henchmen for a living, right? He couldn't be like an
He's an assassin. The Black Widows are assassins. It should have just been an offshoot.
Yeah, I know. You really couldn't do. That's why I'm like, you really ultimately have to have someone that's at least a little bit familiar with the source material. It's like Taika Waititi recently said he never read a Thor comic, and I'm like, well, it shows.
Yeah,
it really. As someone that has seen Thor: Love and Thunder and hated it, I'm like, yeah. All you have to do is show me that movie, and I'm like, you obviously have no idea who Thor is because this should have been the movie.
Yeah, I guess those. I don't know. Joe said he liked it. I haven't seen it yet. That's the thing. Is it not worth my time? I did not like Thor Ragnarok.
Then you're probably not gonna like. Then you're probably
not
gonna
like it. It was humorous, but I was like, as a Thor movie, not for me.
Exactly. Max Priestley has the same opinion because he's a massive Thor fan. He's like, oh no, I do not like this.
I actually like that first one, the Kenneth Branagh.
Oh yes.
I was like, besides the villain kind of being, not all that great, which is in a lot of MCU movies. I was like, man, this is a really good take. There's some really good, funny one-liners that kind of come out of nowhere. They're not played specifically for laughs like it's a jokey movie, but when he drinks the beer and or is it coffee?
Another.
And throws it down? Yeah.
He walks into a pet store. I need a horse. Well, you know what? You know why it's not so many stupid jokes? Because that's before like Guardians of the Galaxy. Because after that, the MCU became like this massive, long, oftentimes inappropriate comedy. So I'm like, okay.
Yeah, the James Gunn humor, and he does a good job with it. I like Guardians of the Galaxy a lot. I didn't like the second one as much, but it was funny, but then it just kind of became the norm. It's just like I don't know, preschool humor for the most part. But they still done a better job than the DC. You just think about like Batman versus Superman. They wrapped in like the Dark Knight Returns and the death of Superman all into one story and blew it. Like, how do you do that?
I'm going to disagree with you on that one, dude.
Jesus, that thing was awful.
Yeah, but so going back, but what's interesting about like another thing that I'm sure you agree with me with in terms of why comics are also niche and why comics struggle to find a larger audience because of like when you say you're that fan who sees like a Thor movie or like now a Superman movie and goes, I want to read a Superman comic. You go to your LCS. Who's John Kent?
The mantle swaps are definitely a problem. That's certainly not helping, but just everything about the way that comic books have been presented, like really over the last 40 years in superhero comics for America are just kind of, they're obstacles in the way of new readers. Like if I remember when I first started reading, I didn't start reading comic books all that much until I was in my 30s. And I remember going to the comic shop. I wanted to get a Batman comic. I had no idea, like, which one am I supposed to get here?
Yeah.
There must have been 8 different Batman comics. Like, if I want to read the Batman story, where's volume 1, followed by volume 2, 3, 4, kind of like that. And the continuities are so divergent, and there's so many things that cross over, but then all of a sudden they're not in continuity, but now they are in continuity.
And contradict.
And yeah, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They really need to get a grasp on what is the Superman story. What is the Batman story? What is the Iron Man story? And specifically, other than like Spider-Man, the Marvel stuff is much easier. I think the DC stuff is, I like DC more, but it's much more unwieldy to get in there and try and find a character and find out what the real story is. And a lot of times, there might be 4 or 5 different origins associated with the character these days.
And I agree with you on that. And one of the I got in near the beginning of the New 52, and that's why I'll always maintain that the New 52 idea is great, because what it was is, assume we never published a comic book and we're just starting from square one. Now you can jump in. That's why I say periodically they should do like a complete reboot, because that way you bring in more people, because they don't encounter the difficulties you did. If we're starting at if you're just coming in and you want to read Batman #1, the problem with the New 52 is that they didn't commit to the reboot. They kept all the continuity for Batman and Green Lantern, even though it's like Blackest Night apparently happened when half the characters don't exist.
Batman had like 3 Robins in 5 years, and one of them
his back got broken. Jason Todd happened. I'm like, this is a rough 5 years.
Yeah, none of that really makes sense. I think they should just really go back. Somebody needs to go back with some authority and be like, this is what Batman Year One is. And be like, this is the origin, and we'll go through the Frank Miller stuff. Obviously, that should be the Year One, and then the story continues on there and get something linear. And then just start collecting this stuff and putting out in volume and saying, if you want to read Batman, here's where you start. And then we're going to continue on, and eventually we'll connect to what we're doing now. And then stick with it. That's the problem. They continuously kind of, I don't know, they lose faith in what they're doing. Maybe the sales go down a little bit. And they're like, what we need to do? Let's just alter everything about the character, including all the history, and throw half of it out. And it's like, well, then why did I spend the last 5 years getting caught up? For you to decide that it didn't matter anymore.
They either do that or they give Brian Michael Bendis complete control over a character. We all know how that turned out.
Yeah, it's like Superman is just in the worst possible shape. They can't even sell a damn Wally West comic book anymore because of Heroes in Crisis.
Which is sad, because Wally West was my first Flash, because I grew up on the Justice League Unlimited animated show.
A lot of people did. And if you read the current Flash series from Jeremy Adams, it's damn good. Like, it's the Flash family. It's Wally West and his wife and his 2 kids having superpowers, and Max Mercury and Bart Allen. They're all there, doing Flash stuff together. And it's really a celebration of Wally West and the character. And no one will read it because of Heroes in Crisis. People just, they're almost like shell shocked to go in there and buy a damn DC comic that's starring Wally West anymore.
Thank you, Tom King. But that actually goes into another thing I want to talk about. I think the other issue, and I've said this on a couple of other episodes, I think one of them that you were on, was DC's needs to tell their editorial, you can say no to the creatives. If they give you a story that is going to fundamentally break the character or contradict with what we've established before, tell them no, you have to redo this.
Well, I don't know that it's... I think the editors probably have the authority and know that they do to say no. I just think they have bad editors. I don't think they've really hired very many people that know how to write stories, specifically like formatting, 3-5 act stories, which they're trying to execute, but they're not being done very well. And then you don't have like the oversight of someone that's like, your job, and I'm paying you, $150,000 a year or hopefully more, is to make sure that the essence of these characters isn't diluted, that we don't do anything that's going to hurt the value of the franchises and the brands that we have here within the comic books. And so you have these editors that, quite frankly, are incompetent. They're not really, qualified to do the job that they have. They don't know how to manage what they are managing themselves. And they're just letting every Tom, Dick, and Harry, well, a lot of times I think it's just their friends. And from what I'm told and the way I understand it, a lot of these stories that are being told that we hate aren't the stories from the writers. Like the story is being pitched to the writer, and then the writer goes and executes the editor's story.
Well, that's unfortunate.
It can work if your editor is Chuck Dixon or, you know what I'm saying? If it's some type of, Denny O'Neil used to do stuff like this where he would map out, what are we going to do with Batman for the next 5 years? And he would map it out, and then the writer would come in and execute it. But he's Denny O'Neil, he's done everything with every character. But we don't have like that kind of oversight and that kind of story craft involved in the creative process anymore. So you basically have broken creators with broken editors making broken stories, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't know that like a lot of the bad storylines are like by the editorial. That's interesting. But and that it gets into there are not a lot of editors, because remember what happened like 2020, 2021, there was this big like bloodbath where they purged their editorial staff, and I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. Plus the fact
they
also
cut themselves to the bone and got rid of a lot of people that had fairly decent reputations in comic books. Supposedly Marvel did the same thing, but that word never really got out. They still haven't talked about it. I think it happened a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Plus the fact, the other issue is that DC lost a lot of its prime talent to like in independent comics. And that's sad, because for the longest time, I've said DC has the more talented staff, where you have like Jeff Johns, Jason Fabok, all these like titans of comic books. Then they left, because I think that if you had the right writer, a lot of these stories could have been at least a little better off. Unfortunately, you're left with the dregs of the writing staff.
Well, yeah, I don't think, Peter J. Tomasi, who used to be an editor himself at DC Comics, he would be a great person to put in charge as a group editor if you wanted to pay him enough. Like, he's not going to go in there and let you pitch something stupid for Batman and then actually do it. He's going to tell you, no, I'm not going to do that with Batman. Let's see if we can make the story work for the character itself. And I just don't think there's a lot of people that are that invested in the characters. A lot of, this is work for hire stuff, and there's so many opportunities out there. You saw it like within the span of like 2 weeks, the Batman writer, James Tynion, was brought over to Substack. The X-Men writer, Jonathan Hickman went over to Substack, and the Spider-Man writer, Nick Spencer, also went over to Substack. There's opportunities out there, and they were getting a lot of money, and I don't blame them for leaving, especially with the, I don't know, what goes into making a comic book at DC and Marvel these days. If you were a good, competent writer, it would be frustrating.
Yeah, and man, when you mentioned Jonathan Hickman, I just think of the wasted opportunity that was his X-Men run. Particularly, it's like when you read like House of X, Powers of 10, and then you find out he didn't really get to like continue the story as he wanted, and I'm like, oh no.
No, he had a full 3-year plan. Like, this is what the first year is going to be. This is what the second year is going to be, and this is, we should be getting into like the last chapter of what he was going to do, and we're stuck in the very first. They haven't even left it yet. And that's that's obviously why I walked away. And I don't blame him there either. You create something beautiful and they just go and destroy it.
Yeah, it's really, really odd. It's like we're stuck on this island, and I get it. Krakoa was a good idea in the beginning for like a relatively short story. Now we're stuck here, and I'm like, to quote Doc, just throw the whole thing into the sun at this point. I don't care.
Yeah, well, Marvel's never really done a Crisis-like reboot. They could probably use it about now. A lot of their stuff has deviated quite substantially from the characters, and a lot of times they're just coming back and regurgitating the exact same stories. Like, we're about to get, Donny Cates is one of the hotter writers out there. I think a lot of people would say he's Marvel Comics' best writer. What does Hulk Planet sound like?
Oh, jeez.
He's going to go back to Planet Hulk or whatever. And of course, they're doing that with Greg Pak too. It's like we probably need some new directions. I wish they had left the Ultimate Universe in place, so you had another playground where you could experiment with the characters and maybe do some things that were interesting. But we're kind of stuck in this weird cycle where it's kind of the same ideas over and over and over again.
That's another thing I think DC needs. It's its own version of the Ultimate Universe, because what they could have done is kept the regular universe, so they didn't want to do a reboot, but also on the side kept a new 52 world, because it's like at the end of Doomsday Clock, they kind of established that's on its own Earth. They could have kept it like that and just used that as like their Ultimate Universe, meaning there's less continuity and you have to deal with, and that way it's more likely that newer people could jump on in order to read that and then go, okay, I want to go read the other line.
I think having a smaller, more contained alternative line is a really good idea, because it can be 5 or 6 titles max a month.
Yeah.
And you can really have that wonderful tight continuity where everything you're reading matters, and it kind of convinces you to go read the other stuff. Right now, that's just not the case. We got Axe Judgment Day from Marvel Comics. You got the Avengers, you got X-Men, and you got the Eternals in there. Didn't really lead up to it in X-Men. Didn't really lead up to it in Avengers. It led up to it in Eternals. Is okay. I would have rather just skipped it. I don't know why this thing's even happening, but whereas if you had the Ultimate Universe doing a storyline like that, and you only had a few titles, you could really make them connected. DC, I think, has the opportunity, or maybe it's had, I'm not really sure, with the White Knight universe. Obviously, we have the characters specifically from Gotham, but I think Sean Gordon Murphy has confirmed that there's a Superman out there, there's a Wonder Woman out there, and that White Knight universe could have been their version of the Ultimate Universe, and they could have made a lot of. They could have made the continuity real tight and made things really matter and really be impactful. But
then again, these companies doing like good decisions, I'm kind of beyond that at this point.
Yeah, I mean, you got the Black Adam movie with the biggest action movie star in the world, The Rock, Dwayne The Rock Johnson. And what do? Well, let's kill off Black Adam and replace him with White Adam.
I know this is like
okay.
That's my other issue, is that we're coming out with a movie that's going to heavily feature this one character. Let's replace him.
I don't think he's going to be in the story. Obviously, he's going to be in like hell or whatever. But is that what people really want to see right now? Shouldn't he be celebrating Black Adam? Although he's a villain, I don't. All this making the villains good guys stuff. It's for the birds.
Annoying. So I was on a live stream a couple days ago, and they asked me, so let's assume that Zaslav is going to do something with the comics. What I said is that if he does anything with the comics, he's going to say, okay, in terms of Superman, we just have Clark Kent. We're not going to have Clark and John. We're not going to have Bruce and Jace. In other words, we're just going to have Clark Kent, Superman, Bruce Wayne, Batman, Diana Prince, Wonder Woman, and just leave it at that. We're not going to have all these derivative characters, because ultimately it's too confusing. Or at least they're going to be like backup characters in the main Batman book, but only Bruce Wayne and only Clark Kent get a book.
I think you could see that, but I think he's got some options there. Obviously, he's not going to get too in the weeds with the DC Comics kind of thing, but he's looking for $3 billion worth of savings. Certainly just reprinting old stories is on the table. I would say maybe licensing out the DC characters to other publishers. Certainly, I would imagine, is on the table. That's a way to generate some money instead of spending it. I would imagine, he's going to want to get the heroes right. We have too many versions of every hero. How many Green Lanterns do we need? How many Flash characters do we need? How many different versions of Robin can we have in one universe? And I think we're kind of pushing the limits right now. I don't think that he'll be that in the know, but I could see him scaling down DC Comics budget if they do keep him around and operational, which I imagine hopefully they will. But I can imagine him scaling the budget down significantly to where maybe instead of getting 65 new comic books, 32 of which or 35 of which are Batman related, maybe you do 25 comic books in a month, and you get your regular titles out there, your Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Justice League, make them impactful, get the best talent on there instead of spreading yourself so thin. Maybe that happens. I mean, obviously it's kind of all in the air, up in the air right now.
Yeah, but I do think particularly we could see, if anything changes at DC Comics, we will see more of an emphasis on the Trinity, because he himself has said that we have to work on Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. And I think, we could see maybe DC putting a competent team on the Wonder Woman book, because you and I have talked about this many times. The problem with Wonder Woman is that, yes, she's the most famous female superhero, but when's the last time she had a fantastic, memorable run since, Greg Rucka, maybe?
Yeah, it's probably Rucka. I don't think we'll get any competent comic book teams put on any of these characters. I think if they'll slash the budget to the bone, and you just won't have the page rate to hire anyone competent. It's going to be really young writers, people that just don't have a name or whatever. And you're like, hey, I could put Jared from Comics League on Batman and probably still sell 35,000 copies in a month and make a little bit of money off of it.
I would do so well as a writer at DC.
You don't need a big name writer on Batman, and Superman. Traditionally, you wouldn't need one, but I don't know. It's not a good time. I'm glad there's some accountability, but I'm also nervous about the future of all this stuff. You could see some major changes going down over the next 18 months, really, with the comic books and the future of DC Comics as far as comic books themselves. And I don't want to see these things go away. I want people to be able to take chances, but they've been taking the same chances over and over again for the last, 4 or 5 years now, and it's never worked out.
Plus, how many times have they killed and brought characters back to life? Hell, the last episode I had you on was about how death means nothing in comic books. Yeah, and what's kind of funny is that at San Diego Comic-Con, they released a preview of like the Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths, like issue 5 or something like that, and it shows the Justice League coming back to life. And I'm like, oh, you mean they're not dead? Who could have predicted this?
Yeah, it's one of the things about Dark Crisis I don't think makes sense from a narrative perspective, just as far as writing. And I'm not a professional writer. I don't want people to think that I am, but I have studied this stuff quite a bit. I don't think it ever really works when the reader knows more information than the heroes.
Yeah.
And you and I, as the reader, we know that the Justice League aren't dead.
Yeah.
But nobody in the book knows that the Justice League aren't dead. And we know that Deathstroke isn't killing anybody because Pariah told him he couldn't kill anybody. But none of the heroes know that. They're talking about, Deathstroke's going to kill us all. And I'm going, as the reader, no, he's not. He's told he can't do it. He has to wait. And it's like, I don't think that ever really works. It doesn't build suspense or tension. It just makes the story drag. And you're kind of going, man, I wish these guys would get in on it because I already know.
Yeah, that's true. That's one of the issues is that they reveal too much too early. They have to sparse this out a little more so that because you're supposed to be able to discover the stuff with the characters, not before the characters understand this, because then all the stakes go away.
Yeah, can you imagine, like, if you knew all the stuff that was ahead and like all the obstacles that Frodo had to overcome reading Lord of the Rings? It'd be really boring. Like, man, I wish this guy would figure out that this Gollum guy is going to turn on him. Like, I know what's going to happen.
But and it's actually a good transition to my next point, is that one of the reasons why I think people have so much trouble getting into comics is because there's too many events with too many tie-ins. Because we saw in like the example I always use is King in Black. Pretty much every Marvel book had a tie-in to that, and oftentimes I'd say I'm fine with tie-ins if they like add to the story. But the problem with a lot of these tie-ins is that they put very important plot details in every tie-in. So you're not getting the full story unless you read all 9,000 tie-ins as well. So I'm like, that's not economic
BS of that. I think like the first appearance of King in Black, like the first scene was, I think, an Agents of Atlas or something. And it's literally the last scene in the book. It's like, that's not a tie-in. That's a teaser. What are you doing here? And they did the same thing with a couple of other comic books. It's like, I think it was Beta Ray Bill. Was Beta Ray Bill tied into King in Black? I think it was. I was like, why is this even there? They had to like redesign one of the monsters at the beginning of the story, and it's like, this makes no sense whatsoever.
Like, Silver Surfer showed to tied into this book, and I'm like, I get what you're trying to do. You're trying to make the story seem more like sprawling, but at least make it worth my time to buy all these things instead of like basing the tie-in purely off someone saying no once. I'm like, come on, guys, this is really annoying.
Yeah, and they put a bunch of like not even C or D list writers. They just like go out there and put anybody. It doesn't matter the name as long as it has a tie-in. And they spend very little money on them. And you just don't get very good stories. I don't read the tie-ins for the most part, unless I have to. Like, I read the Daredevil King in Black tie-ins, and those were actually really good. But those are written by Chip Zdarsky.
So yeah, of course.
Kind of makes sense.
I've heard his Batman run is really good. So
the first 2 issues have been excellent. I've really enjoyed it. He really knows how to get a good performance out of Jorge Jimenez, who is a great comic book artist.
Oh,
You're always going to get a well-illustrated comic book. But when you have a writer that knows how to really use Jorge Jimenez's immense talents the right way, you get an even better story.
Yeah, I became a fan of Chip Zdarsky from Justice League Last Ride. That was fantastic. It's like,
Yeah, that was a really good one.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. And speaking of great writers, you know who's actually? It's funny because one of the writers that I always say is a good Elseworlds but not good in continuity writer is actually Tom Taylor. Because when you think about it, his books, Injustice, Dark Knights of Steel, Deceased. I'm like, why can't you just be the Elseworlds writer?
Yeah, I think he had a little like a Suicide Squad thing in there too that people like. But yeah, then he goes and does X-Men Red, All New Wolverine. Yeah, Superman, Son of Kal-El. Nightwing started out good, and people were like, "No, Nightwing's good." I was like, "Tell me what's happened. That's what I want to know. Tell me what has happened in the last year." It's almost in the same place.
That's the problem with like a lot of these stories. To expand it, they put so much fluff. Like, let's go watch. It's essentially like the mainstream news tracking a celebrity. Let's go watch Nightwing get coffee with Barbara Gordon, and I'm like, do I care about this?
Well, yeah, I mean, you got so many issues in there in that Nightwing run too, where basically the entire point of the comic book is to tell you that Dick Grayson's a great guy. But it's like if you're a DC fan, you know Dick Grayson's a great guy. You don't need to tell me six times. It's already been established.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could argue they're trying to reestablish it after the Rick Grayson years, but that's beyond the point.
I think everyone forgot about the Rick Grayson years. That's awful. Not even Dan Jurgens could save that.
It's like it's like a lot of people tend to forget that Brian Michael Bendis had free reign on Superman. We're all like, nope, I'm out. Nope.
That was rough.
That was a rough couple of years, dude. I'm like, oh geez. Or Tom King on Batman. Everyone's like, no, I'm out. See you later.
I think Tom King's Batman, I think people were still along for it until like the lead up to issue 50 and obviously the wedding that they said was going to happen. They promised was going to happen. Then it didn't happen. And then it just fell off the rails. I don't think Tom King could take the criticism, and he kept doubling down and making it worse.
Another thing I think is the issue is that, and we kind of touched on this throughout this episode, is that a lot of these like writers will have these characters act completely inconsistent with like how like say Warner Bros. Discovery wants Batman to act, and that's very, very, very like bad because if you're a movie fan, let's say that the like assumption that these companies have that you see the movie and you want to read the comic book is true. You go to pick up a Batman comic or like a Wonder Woman comic, and you're like, this is not, even though it says Diana Prince, this is not the woman I saw in the movie.
Nah, there's a lot of weird different interpretations. Obviously the characters do go through like periods where they're a little bit different, but you gotta have a good writer for stuff like that. If you really want to do something different, even like the Denny O'Neil Wonder Woman stuff, people hated that still. I think it was Denny O'Neil that made her like a super spy.
That was great. That's one of the things I'm like, who thought that was a good idea? Taking away your powers.
It's fine. It's like is a story. It's well executed, but is it Wonder Woman? I guess is the question. Probably not.
And also the other problem is that it's like take the Flash movie. They apparently think Flash has only had one good storyline, Flashpoint. What?
Yeah, well, there's so much good Flash out there. It's not even funny, but Flashpoint is just, it's such an easy cop out, where you can reset everything. They've done it, what is it, like 2 or 3 times in the Arrowverse?
And in the animated movie universe, and
and
actually in the comics.
Yeah, so it's just like one of those Deus Ex Machina moves where, well, we messed things up. Let's go to do a Flashpoint. You will just change everything, and kind of erase our mistakes, kind of thing. But there's a lot of really good Flash stuff out there, especially when you had Wally as the sidekick to Barry. Just really good stuff back in the day. And then obviously you have the Mark Waid, Flash run. Those just, I'm shocked they haven't really done anything with that.
I have a buddy, by the way, my co-host. He didn't know that the Flash in Justice League was Wally West. He thought that was Barry Allen. And I'm like, wait a second. They call him Wally West in the show.
You're talking about the movie?
No, in the in
Just League Unlimited.
Yeah, well, because the series before that was called Justice League, but it's because he didn't know that Wally West died in Crisis, and then didn't come back until Final Crisis, like fully come back, and I'm like, well,
they don't act like each other. Wally West is way more braggadocious and louder than Barry Allen.
Yeah, I know. Well, here's the thing, though. A lot of the mainstream portrayals of Barry Allen, which is like, it's to say the TV show and the movie, kind of make him more like Barry Allen. I mean,
like Wally, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's probably because ultimately, well, it's like in the Justice League movie, you have to have one character that's the jokester, really, because you can't have everyone being moody people.
I don't know, man. That was a bad interpretation of that wasn't Barry Allen or Wally West. I don't know what Ezra Miller was doing there, but I don't know. I think that movie might end up getting canceled. I don't think Ezra Miller can cross the law too many more times.
Honestly, yes. I'm starting to think that, like, a Hollywood Reporter article came out saying that is on the table, and I think that if Ezra keeps going down this path, it's gonna eventually they're gonna say, you know what, we'll take a tax loss on this too. We're done. Let's just end this.
Yeah, we need to reset anyway. We don't like the direction we're going. Maybe this isn't the best idea.
However, I don't think they're going to do a full reboot because that would mean that they would have to recast everyone. They still have popular, because ultimately Jason Momoa is still popular as Aquaman. Gal Gadot is still popular as Wonder Woman. At least those two are still too popular enough for those two to get recast.
I don't know. They've rebooted the Suicide Squad and they kept the Amanda Waller actress.
Well, technically that wasn't a reboot. They left it open to that could conceivably be a sequel to the previous one, because they didn't really do anything that contradicted the previous movie.
I thought it was supposed to be a reboot, but
yeah, I don't know. They
Suicide Squad was funny. I liked it.
I liked it. It's just I'm not really a big fan of James Gunn's humor when he's unrestrained, but I acknowledge it was an enjoyable movie. It's just my problem.
Step up from the first one. That movie sucked. The original Suicide Squad.
Well, you know why?
Why are you doing this for 45 minutes?
Well, remember, there's actually another version of that called the Ayer cut, which apparently is way better.
I don't believe that.
I
watched the Snyder cut halfway through. That was enough for me. It's not better. It's bad.
Very disagree with you on that one. But so let's see. But the other problem is that at least what they should do with the movie universe before they reboot it is just have like a Justice League movie come out where they completely wrap up that storyline. In other words, you don't have to bring Zack Snyder back, but just wrap up his story, because here's why. You have to show the general audience that you can wrap up a story. Because for so much of the DCEU was, okay, we're telling the story. Nope, just kidding. We're telling the story. Nope, just kidding.
Yeah, the final Justice League movie might cost them like $250 million. You really want to chance $250 million? You can say, listen, we finished it. We said we would.
But you would establish more consumer confidence in your product that you are going to actually complete a product. Yeah, that's true.
That's not the issue.
That's true. I'll give you that one.
It's like my chief used to tell me. He said, Sergeant Doherty, bad news does not get better with time. It's not like wine.
That's true. But so going back to what I was talking about, also what would actually be a good idea, speaking of movies, for like making comics at least more widely available, speaking of digital comics specifically, is that you remember, it's like whenever you picked up a DVD, they would give you a digital copy. Mm-hmm. It would be interesting if they would make it so, okay, if you like pick up, like, say, an animated Justice League movie that's an adaptation of a comic, they give you a digital version of the comic.
What I would do, and I think I've mentioned this before.
Go ahead, actually,
when you do like a video game, mm-hmm. You open up the little thing and there's a little a voucher in there. And mm-hmm. let's say that 3 comic book stories kind of inspired this Batman video game.
Yeah.
You go in there, it says, create a DC universe login or DC Infinite Universe login.
Mm-hmm.
You put in this code and then you get access to these 3 stories for 90 days. You go and read them, and you go and buy a movie. You get a little voucher code with the stories. Like the Batman movie. You can get a
Ego,
City of Crime.
One.
You get Batman Ego. You can get some really cool stuff in there. and just give people a free taste of what it's like. You've got them now. They have a login. They had to use their email. You can send them a couple of advertisements, a little couple offers, and see if they want to come back in and maybe get a 1 month subscription and see if there's more Batman out for it.
Yeah, and what's good about that?
Flash.
What's good about that is that yes, they form like a temporary account, but when they log in, they see also that you at least have access, if you have the main account, to this entire, because that's the one thing, that's one of the things I will say they did great with that app, is giving you access to like practically every DC comic. So you see, you get all of this for a membership that could plug the membership.
Yeah, it's even like remember they did the Batman Fortnite. Now they're doing the Marvel Fortnite. Go in there and give them a 30-day access, and maybe tell them where some of these uniforms came from. Be like, hey, this skin that you're going to be playing with, that was introduced by Jim Lee and Jeff Loeb in Hush. Go read Hush. You get a 30-day membership, and maybe there's some transference because so many people did come in to buy those comic books specifically for the skins for the game. Just an idea.
I mean, you see, here's what the comic book industry needs to be doing. They need to be leveraging other media in order to like bring in all these new customers. And that Fortnite thing, as much as I can't stand Fortnite, is a perfect example of what happens when you take what's popular and like, I guess, like attach yourself to that item.
Co-marketing, co-branding.
Yeah, exactly. Co-branding. And another thing they could do is, I mean, let me put this. I think McFarlane also has a pretty decent idea with the page punchers, in that it comes with a small action figure or now a larger action figure, and it has the comic that features that character, at least bring in the action figure crowd.
Yeah, that's smart business. It's hey, you like this? This is where it came from. You might be the story that you always wanted to read.
Although it's kind of funny is that Perch actually brought up a funny point. He goes, okay, so they have Superman, which is the first issue of the reboot Tomasi Gleason run. Flash is Flashpoint. He's like, there's so many other books that you could have done for Flash. We've already talked about that. Batman they nail because they just brought in the first issue of Hush. Black Adam, it's just his tie-in for Endless Winter. So like, you kidding me?
It's got to be something better.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be some Black Adam story or some story that at least features Black Adam that you could have put in there.
Endless Winter, is that the thing where they were frost giants? And
yeah,
I think it was like Busiek, 80 Landing, maybe.
I think it was.
I think it was. That's like one of those stories. Like, I don't even know why this is being made.
Yeah, it was Lanning, but you know why? Because it was December and they needed a Christmas story.
It was a Christmas story? I didn't even know that. I just thought it was a Thor ripoff.
Well, that's true. It is a very much. If you look at Wonder Woman's design too, like the Viking look, that's very inspired by Thor, obviously.
Yeah, you got to see it in there.
But and also, so one of the other issues I think that I think the MCU is going to run into is that when they're putting so much content out, because it's like at San Diego Comic-Con they announced like the next 20 years of content practically. I think that what they're going to end up doing is burning people out to all superhero content. So in other words, they're screwing everyone at this point.
They're not going to burn me out. They're not going to burn you out.
Us,
the normies, these things, these fads happen. You know what I mean? There was a time when the Western was the most popular movie in all of entertainment, and it lasted for like a decade. And they don't even make any Westerns anymore, hardly. So,
arguably the
everything
Mandalorian
has
counts.
its season. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Arguably the Mandalorian counts as a Western.
Yeah, it's not a movie.
But yeah, that's true. We need a Mandalorian movie. But and also another thing that honestly I actually discovered, and that Marvel actually did. That's actually a really good idea. They actually released a comic book version of the Mandalorian show. In other words, each issue is one of the episodes, and I'm like, that's a way to get the TV show crowd. That's actually a good idea.
They also do that with the movies. Whenever there's a new Star Wars movie, there will always be the comic book adaptation of it. Normally it's in 6 issues. They started that ever since the very first Star Wars movie. I think the first issue of Star Wars came out before A New Hope.
Yeah, it did. Well, and also they're doing that for Black Adam. But my problem with that is that they're not advertising it enough, because what they could do at the end of the trailer is read the prequel story in these comic books. In other words, as soon as they say like it's coming out here, it's coming out at this time, read the prequel story. Because they have prequels for every Black Adam character. So I'm like, it stands to reason they should be marketing that more.
I'm with you, man. I wish they would put a lot more effort into marketing, and that some of these other mediums, and I'm sure Marvel Studios are going, yeah, we created Marvel characters. No, you didn't. The comic books did. I wish they would give more credit and try to help out a little bit more as far as getting awareness out there that comic books are out there and there's more good stories with these characters. But I think at this point, it's not going to happen, unfortunately.
Plus, also you have too many like creatives that think that they're the first to like have the first Black X-Men character, and I'm like, actually, no.
No.
I'm like, have you read the books?
Yeah, they just had that what is his name? Web Weaver. He's going to be the first gay Spider-Man. I was like, I swear to goodness, I just read Spider-Punk.
Yeah. It's like these people obviously don't read first off, it's very evident that a lot of the creatives I've never read these characters before based upon how they have them act, or at least they have their own headcanon in how they want these characters to act. Then they just impose that on other people and then are offended when the fans reject it.
Yeah, it's a weird the kind of attacking fans over what is a lot of times pretty light feedback or criticism when it comes to some of these issues. But I don't know, everyone's kind of thin-skinned these days. That's a good thing about being a YouTuber. You can't be thin-skinned.
Yeah, no, you kind of have to build up a tough skin.
There's a lot of jerks out there. They're all telling us how bad we are.
Exactly. So as we wrap up, I want to ask. So let's say you're put in charge of making comics less like niche. How would you do it?
Oh man! So first thing I would do is I would get Marvel and DC and Image and Boom and all them together, and I would create something to compete with Comixology.
Mm-hmm.
I would make like the monthly subscription fee to be like $4 or $5. Mm-hmm. And I would just make that a gateway into comic book culture and comic book stories, and mm-hmm. make it super duper affordable, almost like, Shonen Jump, where it's like, it's $2 a month.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I don't read a damn manga in that month, what am I really out? I'm only out $2. If you could get all these great stories together, it'd be like, it's $4 a month. It's a library with the best Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Avengers, Captain America stories that you can ever get your hands on, and you can read the bad ones if you want to, if you love the character that much. Mm-hmm. I think that would be very helpful, and it would expand, access to the characters in the medium essentially globally. There's such a inhibitor right now, like here in Asia, because I'm in the Philippines, comic books are inordinately expensive mm-hmm. in comparison to what the normal person here makes, but there's no distribution for Marvel and DC or any of these American comics in Asia. So on top of just being too expensive, it's another 25% just to buy the comic book, and then I have to have it shipped to my house. If they gave it for a good price and they made it to where you don't have to worry about the fact that you don't own it physically, or you're just renting, access to the comic book in the form of a subscription, I think you would open yourself up to like hundreds of millions of new customers. I think obviously manga has proven that. That would be the one thing I would do first. That would be my mm-hmm. focus. Global expansion via digital distribution.
It's a fantastic idea. One of the things I would do is I would put, and I could see Discovery actually doing this, putting a pause on all new comic books after Dark Crisis and saying, we're going to publish reprinted trades for like, let's say 6 months. All these trades of like our most famous storylines, because that way we remind the fans that we have published good stories in the past. We do have like Dark Knight Returns, All-Star Superman. We have these storylines that are the foundation for our universe. And then once we've essentially sort of regained the trust of the fans and like brought in new fans because of these storylines, then we can restart the line. I would essentially do a new 52 style reboot, and then say from this point on, we have to respect the continuity. In other words, No contradictions. I don't care if you have this idea for this dope storyline. Nope. We're staying with the continuity. And then I would 100% try. I would essentially put like a requirement that no mantle swaps. At least while Clark Kent is Superman in the movies, because we have to. Because if we're operating under the assumption that people go see a Superman movie, then come and read Superman comics, we have to have the same Superman.
A little bit of synergy between mediums would definitely help. And you know, a reboot again. I mean, we're in the middle of a reboot right now. That's what Dark Crisis is. You know, it's a crisis event. It's when they reboot their continuity. So I don't know. I think just I wouldn't tell anybody anything that you were doing. I would just do it and see if people noticed, and just try and be consistent with it.
Well, yeah, but what I mean is that I would at least tell people we're publishing trades for right now. We're not going away, because immediately, if DC stops publishing monthly comic books for any amount of time, the narrative is going to be
making videos every week.
Yeah, exactly. The narrative is going to be DC shutting down. This is the end times.
It's over, baby.
And that's also another problem a lot of these comic book companies run into. There's no communication with the fans. You saw it for like 2 years during the merger, how long people were like saying DC is going to shut down. And at no point did DC say, no, we're safe, we're all good. Or at least they didn't do it in a way that made people believe it.
Jim Lee eventually came out and said it wasn't happening, but it was like 9 months after that rumor started.
Yeah, it has to be a
little late on that one, buddy.
Yeah, it has to be right at that rumor. And another thing, I would have someone other than Jim Lee doing the marketing, because as great as he is as drawing books, he's not always the best at delivering a message well.
Nah, he's not a good public face of the company. He's not. I don't think he's someone that likes to go out in a crowd and really just start selling. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. But in other words, I would have. That's the other thing that DC has to work on, is its communication to the public, because it has done a horrible job, particularly the last couple of years, at communicating with the fans. Because the minute there was a rumor that DC was shutting down, there should have been a public release on Instagram, like an hour after that at least, saying, no, we're not shutting down. Here's what's actually happened. It's going to lead to some changes, but we're not going anywhere.
There's a way to do it. I wouldn't want to respond to everything everyone said, because then people would start saying stuff just so you could respond, because they could feel like they're a big deal kind of thing.
But what I mean is that if it's a rumor, I
got you. Yeah.
I was saying, if it's a rumor picked up by like comicbook.com, and if the rumor is picked up by all of the reputable comic book trades that people listen to, then I think you can actually go, okay, guys, we have to respond to this at this point.
Yeah, they waited a bit long on that. They definitely need better communication. They lost that when Dan Didio was showing the door.
Yeah, exactly. We lost someone who hated Wally West and Dick Grayson, and also lost the communication ability of DC. I'm like, oh no.
For all of his warts, he did have some things that he brought to the table, and he was definitely very generous with his time and kind of communicating with people and letting people know what was happening. He was also really smart about making sure that DC were hiring, pretty competent people. There's just no one there that's doing that. That's probably the biggest problem.
Yeah, and I will say, from what I've seen, Dio and Jim Lee are two guys that would definitely admit, you can tell they actually love the medium, which, okay, I'm like, at least I can see that you're at least passionate about comic books to an extent.
Yeah. Jim Lee loves comic books. I think, he just doesn't like to go out there and have to respond to all that stuff. It's not, I don't think it's in his DNA.
Nah, it's not. And plus, it really shouldn't be, really, because it's like DC should have their own like marketing arm or like their own.
Oh, they got a PR office. I've had to try and email them a couple times to get interviews and stuff, but they don't do much.
Yeah, I was about to say,
they play Sudoku and wait for emails.
They read comics while they're supposed to be doing the job, but
I don't think they read comics.
Well, yeah, that's true. But I'm like, that's my point. They're not doing their job. At least they should be doing like their job immediately, saying, there's this rumor that's showing up at all the trades saying we're going to be shut down. I think maybe we should talk about this.
Or it definitely need to be more responsive, no doubt about it.
or at least at the very least, because Jim Lee does all those like live streams where like he draws, he should have at least said, by the way, I know you guys have seen like a rumor that we were shutting down. I can assure you that it's just a rumor. It's not happening.
Mm-hmm.
There's plenty of ways that he can, there's plenty of easier ways besides like doing a press conference, let's say, that he could have actually addressed that a lot better.
Yep, no doubt.
Now, before I let you go, Wes, I got to ask you, so on a more positive note, what comic books are coming out that you're excited for and that you're actually enjoying?
Well, it's definitely Batman Superman World's Finest. Absolutely
I've heard that's
fantastic.
So
good. Shocking, Mark Waid still got it. Dan Mora's art on there is fantastic. Chip Zdarsky and Jorge Jimenez on Batman for the first 2 issues has been really, really good. Over at Marvel Comics, I'm really enjoying Moon Knight. I think Ted McKay's got a good thing on the character. Alessandro Capuccio's art was kind of mind-blowing. Really, everything Peter David is doing, he's doing all these 5-issue miniseries, like set in continuity, like back in the day. And those things are all like gold. They're all like worth your time and money. And it's nice, a little break from the mainline Marvel continuity, which is a little weird right now, in my opinion. So I think that one's been really good. There's a bunch of really good indie comic books I'm reading right now. There's The Kill Lock, The Artisan Wraith, which is a sequel to the story last year that's been really good. I'm really looking forward to this Mark Miller stuff. I just had him on the channel. That was awesome.
I saw it.
But
That's
I think
really good.
Big Game is going to be a cool crossover. I think getting to see Nemesis return. And then obviously we got Nightclub for $2. Can't beat that. So there's a lot of really exciting stuff going on right now. You know what people should read?
What?
It's a really good Wonder Woman story if you're looking for it. There's a Wonder Woman, Batman, the Brave and the Bold. Liam Sharp wrote and illustrated it, and it's all based on Celtic or Celtic culture. It's really awesome.
Yeah, that came out a couple years ago, right? I think I know the book you're talking about. Yeah, first off, Liam Sharp is, I think, one of the best like Wonder Woman artists of all time. I remember he did the art for like the first couple issues of Wonder Woman Rebirth, and I was like, oh, this guy's dope.
Yep. Yeah, he's amazing. So that's a really cool story. I think too many people missed it. I think he's got Starhenge coming out this week, which is actually really good too. But go check that one out if you want something cool with Wonder Woman.
I definitely will. I definitely will. So in terms of what I'm reading a bunch of old stuff. Like I just finished reading Deceased. That's why I brought it up earlier in the thing.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's so good. That's why it's so heartbreaking what Tom Taylor does in the main continuity, because even the lady at the LCS that was checking me out, she was like, yeah, that's true. So I'm like, wait a second. I know you're capable of writing a good Superman story. That's the frustrating part.
That is absolutely.
And a John Kent Superman story. So what are you doing here?
Yeah, go read Swamp Thing Winter Special by Tom King, and you're gonna be like, what the hell happened here? This is such a good comic book.
I know. But and also in terms of indies, I started reading a bunch of Fathom and Witchblade by like Michael Turner, Mark Silvestri. Those are amazing. First off, Michael Turner's art is like out of this world.
He's still got it.
And I just got done reading Batman: The Return of Bruce Wayne after Final Crisis, where he goes through all the different time periods, where they kind of cop out that, oh yeah, that thing that got that Darkseid destroyed, that was just a clone. That's another comic book trope. It's either he wasn't killed or it was a clone.
In the multiverse.
Yeah, of course, the multiverse. Yep. but and then in terms of that's pretty much what I've been reading so far. And I'm in the middle of, in terms of Marvel's, the Thor, the saga of Gore the God Butcher, which is what Thor: Love and Thunder should have been. Because when I'm reading this, I'm like, this, you don't have to do like the 3 timeline Thors, but you tell me you had this on the table and you again, Taika Waititi clearly doesn't read Thor comics. That's besides the point.
I don't think he reads.
It's really like, oh geez. At a certain point, I get you want to make these characters more comedic, but it just doesn't work.
I'm with you. It's very frustrating.
It's like trying to make Batman a comedy again. I'm like, no, that worked for like once, but it's like, no. The minute if they bring back nipples in the Batsuit, I'm gonna be very angry right now. Which honestly,
that'll be spicy.
Yeah, exactly. So on that note, I think I'll call this one a week. Wes, it was a pleasure having you back on the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I love coming on here talking about comic books. It's an interesting period to be a comic book fan. It's always going to be niche, but it's going to be our niche. That's
Exactly.
what
I'm like, you know what? If it never gets more mainstream, fine. The community is awesome. That's the most I will say. Is I very much enjoy being more involved in the comic book YouTube community.
Absolutely. It's a great time to start your comic book YouTube channel. I'll tell you that.
Exactly. And I started in the pandemic. That was an even better time because no one was doing anything. So
the views were definitely up.
So on that note, stay heroic, everyone, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.